Welcome to Listening First, the podcast on rehabilitation and recovery. I'm Patrick Boyd.
And I'm Ben Marram. And we're back again, Patrick. We're back at it. I think we've got a nice rhythm now, haven't we?
We definitely do. I'm feeling really positive about this episode and the next few that we've got to come out as well. It feels like we've got some really exciting conversations to share.
And kind of getting straight to it, we've got a really excellent guest on today, as we always do, but from a slightly different angle, which we've not covered before. So this is someone who is an athlete and was an athlete in a previous role, who has had a brain injury and is, I guess, still recovering or has recovered, I guess, whichever way you want to frame it, and is here to talk about that, their interest in recovery and their angle on recovery, but also an incredible challenge that they're about to set off on.
They'll be doing 2 marathons a day for 100 days, which is just incredible. I mean, I'd struggle to do 1 marathon in probably 100 days. So the fact that they'll be doing 2 a day for 100 days is just absolutely incredible. So our guest is Jacko, David Jackson, an author, former athlete, and a bit of a pioneer, really. So without further ado, let's introduce Jacko. Jacko, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us, and giving the time and the space to open up a really important conversation. I have sort of came into the work where I'm at now, where my life changed forever back in 2013 when a traumatic brain injury and a seizure on the training field ended my professional rugby career. There's quite a long road to recovery, as you both will know, and that was the most difficult thing that me and my wife have had to overcome in our lives so far. We're about to potentially top that with something we're doing for 2 brain injury charities that's going to last 100 days that we can talk about later. But along that journey since 2013, have, I guess, retrained and was looking for opportunities and ways to try and just look after my brain as much as possible, to heal my brain as much as possible, to starve off the dark cloud of early onset of dementia, which is a real thing that looms over someone like myself with the history of concussions and brain injury that I've had. Yeah, brain health has always been over the last 13 years, been a big focus for myself and my wife, because my brain health affects her. We'd only been married a month when I had my injury. I wasn't the man that she married. And when she took me back to hospital with those types of words, we just got sent back home again saying there's nothing wrong with you. And one of the problems with the bleed in my brain, or the scar that an MRI showed 6 months later, was not seen. And this is one of the problems with brain injuries, is that they get quite easily overlooked. And back then also there was sadly a notion of it's just in your head, you'll be all right in a bit. There's nothing, we can't see anything on your CT scan. And you're also given back then very little tools or hope or help in, essentially the advice I was given was to sit in a dark room, because, just simple things like sensitivities to light would kick off my symptoms and stuff. And it was not particularly helpful. So some of the charities, the 2 charities that I'm doing some fundraising for, one of them didn't exist back then, but the other, Headway UK, did. I didn't even know about them when I needed them most. But along my journey, one of the things that started to become apparent was how brain injuries can affect the respiratory center of the brain and dysregulate the nervous system. We weren't measuring things like HRV back then, but, a lot of the more published literature showing a disruption to HRV, disruption to respiratory centers, and I definitely fell into that category of someone with dysfunctional breathing patterns that were keeping me in that stress state, and not allowing my symptoms to settle down. It'd be interesting conversation to when were my symptoms due to my brain injury, and when were they actually just prolonged because of the dysfunctional breathing that I'd developed, because a lot of those symptoms are very reflective of each other. Anyway, so I found breathing exceptionally beneficial for rebalancing the nervous system, restoring good, functional, healthy breathing patterns that helped me not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, to be able to regulate better and start to be the person I was pre-injury. And I'd probably say better person now, having been through that, to be honest. So as difficult as my brain injury was, I thank it, because I wouldn't be here doing what I do now. So I work as retrained as a strength and conditioning coach, but after my own experience with breathing, I started to see some physical performance improvements, not just the brain health side of things. And so we started utilizing some bits with some of the athletes I was training. I was working with the British Paralympic swim team ahead of the Rio Games. And yeah, it started to become quite a profound thing. And it was a bit like, why? Yeah, hold on a minute. Why do we train all the muscles in the body apart from the respiratory muscles? That just doesn't seem logical. Why do we train all these different systems in the body, but we're actually not doing anything specific for the different components of the respiratory system? And just started going down that rabbit hole, and I haven't been back since.
It sounds like you've been on such a winding journey from a point where you were a professional athlete at the top of your game, and then you've come across adversity at many stages in your recovery. But by the sounds of it, there's this thing we talk about in rehabilitation called like meaning making what you've been through worthwhile. And your explanation there of kind of where you are now and how you feel like in some senses you're a better version of you now because of that experience. And of course you've got all sorts of plates spinning, including these challenges that I can't wait to hear about a bit more. But it feels like what you're saying is you've made the most of it and made it worthwhile.
Yeah, it's one of those strange things where like I wouldn't ever want to go through it again, and I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. But there's something obviously in adversity where if you can come out the other side of it, there's potential for growth. I think that the difficulty with the brain injury is like, none of us that have sustained a traumatic brain injury have chosen that path. We haven't chosen that injury. And I'm very aware, having seen the effects for other people, some of which are people I've played with and friends, others of which are people that I've met through being an ambassador at Headway, where, that they can't look on it in the same light as I've done because their recovery is not anywhere near as to the level mine's been. So I don't necessarily, to describe, it's not, I don't sort of feel a duty to then do fundraising, but because I don't think that's the right word, but there is something where it's like, I feel like I've got a second chance, and I'm very aware that other people just don't have that opportunity. And, as I said in the intro, when I needed support the most, I didn't even know about the charities because just the awareness of them is low. I feel like the charities themselves get overlooked, just like brain injuries get overlooked for whatever the reason is. There's lots of charity. It's almost like there's so many charities and so many illnesses and things that need support. There's almost like not enough space out there in the media for it all. So that means some idiot somewhere's got to run 200 marathons in 100 days, which is what I've took up. To make people, it's like someone's going to pay attention to that, surely. We'll say that again, 200 marathons in 100 days, so 2 marathons a day for 100 days. Running is quite a significant metaphor within my brain injury recovery because it was the last physical thing that I didn't have enough resilience for. That I could do, I could cycle, but I couldn't run. Or once I'd built up enough resilience to exercise, but running would always kick off my symptoms. It took me over a year to be able to run and be symptom free. And then even then, if I, pushed myself a bit too much, then all my symptoms would start to come back. So yeah, running was off the table, but running is really quite significant for me and what it stands for me personally in terms of overcoming, that injury.
I can feel my mind circling back a bit, Jacko, because you've mentioned your symptoms. I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about it, because I think a lot of people who listen to this, and maybe people who are at the very early stages of a recovery, where maybe they've gone to the NHS, they've said there's nothing on the scan, go home, dark room, drink plenty of water, rest, don't go back to work for a few weeks, that kind of message. But what was present right at the beginning? How did they change or morph over the time, and where are they at now?
So I guess like the most alarming thing was I lost 2 weeks of memory, and that's never come back. But I'm sort of grateful for that. Like I'm glad I don't remember having a seizure. And then really bad sensitivity to light, headaches, nausea, anxiety, like cognitive, like decision making, like you couldn't think clearly or rationally. The day after being sent home from hospital, I was in a supermarket with my sister who was looking after me, and I wanted a yogurt, and the choice of yogurts and different flavors was so overwhelming that I started burst into tears, stood in a supermarket, and I was aware enough to know that like that shouldn't make you cry. You know, it was like a strange position to be in, where you're observing yourself going like, this isn't right. Like, I know I shouldn't be, but I can't control this. So yeah, and then like extreme fatigue. So I felt like I just couldn't do anything physically either. So just a lot of time in bed really, which is then obviously you throw all those things in the mix. It's very depressing, and then your depression's one of your symptoms, but you know the depression, I'm sure, is also partly because of the environment that you then get sort of forced into.
You mentioned earlier that you ended up having a seizure because of your injury. I'm interested to know, was your injury caused by one event, or was it caused by a series of events? Like we hear about footballers heading the ball.
I'd had, not knowing at the time, but when I'd seen the specialist about, I don't know, 6 months later, once I finally had an MRI scan, they pulled up my history, showed us the scar on my brain, pulled up my history and said, this is a clear cumulative build-up of head injuries. And when you looked back on the history of it, I wasn't aware of it at the time, but when you look back, it was quite clear that, you know, I got first knocked out and taken to hospital and kept in overnight for observation when I was 16. You know, within 3 weeks or whatever, the typical recovery, like I'd made a full recovery with no complications at all. But then throughout my career, for the next 15 years, it was 31 when I had the last one, you know, I'd had a number of concussions, probably more than 10. And the last one where I'd had a seizure and this bleed on the brain, we were training, we were playing touch in the warm-up, and it was two of us on the same team trying to catch the same ball. It wasn't a big collision. Some of my mates said, oh, at first it was funny, like we were about to laugh, but because you two just banged into each other, basically. There's nothing to it. It wasn't a big collision at all. But when I hit the floor, I started having a seizure, and it was like, you know, none of us had seen anything like that before. So yeah, things changed very quickly.
You talked as well about, I guess, the suddenness of this situation. You were a healthy man, top of your game. Patrick alluded to that earlier. This kind of seemingly minor event, you know, in the sense of we were just going to catch a ball. It was kind of mates laughing about it. And then you're left with these really profound symptoms, and like it must have been so overwhelming.
I think at first it was strange. Like there was a lot I didn't really probably want to admit at the time, but equally like your brain is in a state of inflammation and shock and stress, and so you're not clearly, like they're crying looking at yogurts, like you're not in your normal state of thinking. So it's difficult to sort of process what's going on. But I was aware that even though I'd had a lot of brain injuries and concussions, I didn't realize at the time, but each of them, when I look back, it was taking me longer to recover from them. And I had some really bad ones, and some really bad ones where unfortunately they went under the radar. Like I had a triple fracture of my eye socket, so I had to have my eye and cheekbone like reset in an operation like a week after this collision on the field. And I had a huge head trauma there. Huge head trauma. I was an absolute mess. But because I had the injury you could see that needed an operation, that got dealt with. And I won't even have on my record that there was a brain injury then. There'd be no concussion, never had a scan, there'd be nothing. So that type of thing obviously didn't help. But when I was then, I think I knew I'd always come back and manage to play again. So like my first thought was like, you know, okay, I just need to get back to normal. Like these headaches will die down, and I'll get back to playing. But the reality was, I was scared of going back on the pitch. And actually, it took about 6 months before I ended up having the decision sort of taken out of my hands, because I wasn't able to do the return to play protocols. I wasn't making the progress. I mean, I made some progress, but I wasn't able to. I still wasn't able to run. So I then had an MRI scan, saw the neurologist, the consultant, who then, you know, was able to say, look, we can see the scar in the brain from thing. For them, it was, what was frustrating was, for them, it was like, the fact they had a seizure was highly likely they had some sort of bleed. And it was like, well, why has no one told us? Why has no one told us? And then she goes, oh, the cumulative build-up. It was like, well, why has no one, how come, this wasn't like, we didn't fly over to America to see the world leading doctor on brain injuries. It was done at the NHS with in Nottingham, Queen's Medical Centre. It wasn't anything like, it was fair. What it felt like from her was, this was like standard information to her. I knew deep down something wasn't right and this was different, but I wasn't strong enough something that served me well through my life has been like not quitting and giving up on things. But that was a scenario where I really needed to quit rugby, but I wasn't strong enough mentally to do that. I felt like a failure. I associated quitting with failing, whereas it's not the case. It would have been the best thing for me to do. Luckily, I got the support I needed in the end. That consultant said, you need to retire. You're done. They did it in a very nice way. They felt that you could tell the way she was saying it. She was very much knew that was like, this is your career, and I'm giving you some bad news here. But actually, I was exceptionally grateful and essentially took like a big sigh of relief, because it meant, right, okay, I'm accepting what you're saying, and we're gonna draw a line here. We're gonna move on, and life is going to go in a different direction. And that was like a turning point in my recovery. Nothing actually changed then, but more of a, okay, this is now we are now not trying to ever play rugby again. We're going in a different direction. I didn't immediately get better, but it was definitely a turning point, I think, mentally.
It's interesting when you're talking about your professional rugby career and the kind of mindset that you need to have to be successful there. Obviously, you're someone who's incredibly driven, and that you can see that now just through talking to you. That's who you are. But obviously, with this podcast being focused on rehabilitation and recovery, I'm conscious that rehabilitation, those two words, rehabilitation and recovery, could potentially mean different things in different places. So as a professional sportsman, you think of, I imagine, I've never been a professional sportsman, don't be too surprised. But that rehabilitation and recovery may mean something completely different to the rehabilitation and recovery that we know in our field, in the medical, legal and healthcare fields. Did you notice a difference in what rehabilitation and recovery meant after your injury compared to before?
I guess in rugby, the majority of, the brain injury is the one injury that you can't see, and there isn't the rehab. For everything else, you can see the injury. There's like a pro forma or protocol or an estimation of like, okay, you've torn your hamstring, it's a grade 2, and that's going to take 6 to 8 weeks. Or you've done your ACL, it's a grade whatever, you don't need an op, we're going to do these exercises to rehab it. So you'd have a roadmap for that recovery. Whereas I think one of the most difficult things with a brain injury is not only they can't see it, the answer the question, when you ask the question like, am I going to make a full recovery? The answer is like, well, we don't know. And then how long is my recovery going to take? It's also, we don't know. And that not knowing is psychologically very difficult to deal with. And I think we all had an experience of that during COVID, when it was like, when's the lockdowns going to be over and how long is this thing going to go on for? And because the answer was we don't know, we all suffered a lot psychologically. And I definitely think that there's that not knowing is a really difficult thing for us to deal with. And I'd say that'd be the biggest difference with a brain injury. Whereas with any other type of rehab or recovery in a sporting world, it's like, here's the injury, we've classified it, and we've got a known best procedure for rehabbing it, and that would be through exercises and and you'd also have a physio, or you'd have somebody that's then actually going to walk with you through that process. Whereas, unfortunately, it's sort of a little bit sent home, and I remember wife taking me back to hospital because it was just like, you need to do something with this guy because this is not the guy I married. And they looked at the same CT scan they took the month earlier or however long, I can't remember the time frame exactly when that was, and just said, there's nothing on your scan. I don't know if they just said go home, but it was like, there's nothing, there's just basically, go home. So you don't have any hope, I think is. So when if you've done your ACL and the physio goes, right, this is bad, you're going to be out for 9 months, but we're going to do this, and this. Like you immediately you've got something to get your teeth stuck into. And I think that that's where breathing can become a really useful tool for people to go, right, okay, you've had a brain injury, you can't do anything, you're going to sit in your dark room, but also we're going to help you regulate your nervous system a little bit. Here's something that you can do. You're just going to practice breathing quietly, or it's going to be something really, 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 really simple to start with, and it doesn't have to ever get really complicated, to be fair. But giving someone something is, the effect that has on you psychologically, like there's something I can do, there's something in my control, rather than you're sent home with like nothing's in your control and there's nothing that you can do. I mean, that's just depressing in itself.
I think you're right, Jacko. This comes up all the time in my work, particularly with people who've experienced brain injury in the spectrum of severity. And how I frame it is, if you've got what you're describing is uncertain certainty. So I don't know exactly what the recovery will look like, but I know it'll be 9 months for my ACL. So the road is uncertain, but I'm certain I'll recover. Whereas with brain injury, you get the opposite. It's certain uncertainty. It's everybody saying, we don't know. We just won't know. See how it goes. This might help. This might not help. And I think if you're someone who's quite career-driven, a professional athlete, where you've got a kind of roadmap, you know how things might look. There's uncertain certainty. You can manage that, but suddenly you're thrust into massive amounts of uncertainty. And we know as a psychologist that the best friend of anxiety is uncertainty.
Yeah, for sure.
You feel more anxious when you're more uncertain. So it kind of leads me on to my next question, which was, so you get that appointment with the neurologist, you get kind of this career-ending news. What's the next day? Do you start Googling brain injury? What did you do? Did you go to Headway? What was the next step?
No. Nothing changed initially, if you know what I mean. But it was just gradually, I think that decision took some pressure off. And so rather than focusing on recovering to play rugby or getting back to playing rugby, it was actually like, okay, can we get back to just being able to stay awake? Like, you don't now getting to the point where you don't have to have 2 naps or 1 nap like in the day, because that was, it was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to like have a normal 9 to 5 job because I can't stay awake long enough when I'm doing nothing. So yeah, it was very slow. But yeah, over the course of like years, the process sort of went from like looking at anything, like looking for gut health, looking at hormonal health, and it was sort of looking at nutrition and all these sorts of like more holistic practices you can do that's going to be healthy for your body and your brain. And then I think the link into breathing came from like the brain gut axis when we was looking at a bit of that. Like my wife's was a physiologist for like 20 odd years, pointing me down that direction, and then came across some research from, I think it's like 1968, Froman, I think the guy's name was, around traumatic brain injuries disrupting the respiratory centers of the brain. And I was like, well, that's interesting. I've had a brain injury. To look at me, you wouldn't have known there was anything wrong with me. But my sleep wasn't normal, and I had very low resilience to stress, in that it could just be something very simple to make me be overwhelmed, which could just be like, I always joke about sort of being self-employed and get a letter from HMRC just saying, can you fill in your tax return by this date? It wasn't a fine. I wasn't in trouble. But it was just, that would freak me out. And so I was on this like roller coaster where I couldn't regulate my nervous system well, and the poor sleep being a byproduct of that. So when I tried to answer the question of like, okay, I've had a brain injury, how do I know if my breathing's been disrupted? What are my breathing patterns like? What's my CO2 sensitivity like? And it was like, how do you know if you're good at breathing or not? It was like, I had to go down that rabbit hole and think, I'd got like a scientific background, got an engineering degree at Loughborough. When I came across Patrick McKeown's work from the Oxygen Advantage, he talked about it very scientifically, which sort of spoke to me, and I've just never sort of looked back from that, really.
I'm really interested in how your sense of identity changed after going through the process of coming to terms with the fact that you couldn't play rugby anymore. How did your identity change, and how did you deal with that?
It's a great question. I think something I'd always battled with was the identity as a rugby player. I think for whatever reason I liked being a rugby player, but I was aware that like you're sort of putting yourself in some sort of box, or you meet someone's friend and they're like, oh, this is Jacko, oh, he plays professional rugby, and other people were giving you the label, and then it would just sort of feel really awkward and odd to me. So I guess I was probably aware that like, it's not like golf that you can play till you retire. Like if you play a sport like rugby, you're going to have 2 careers. Unless you're within the top, like whatever percent that go on, and there's a very few people that are going to be able to retire and never work again from rugby. And like, I was aware that you're always going to have to do something else as well. I don't know. I sort of felt a bit like, yeah, I play rugby, but I'm me rather than I'm a rugby player. So I think I didn't have the identity crisis that some people can fall into when your career gets cut short or changed. And I was lucky. I was 31 when I retired. Like I played over 300 games. I had a long career, so I was very grateful for that. But what was funny was that I ended up like picking up another identity. So it was like, all right, I'm now retrained as a strength and conditioning coach, and it was like, all right, now I'm and when I was telling you, I did it in my intro when I said to you, I got into strength and conditioning. I wanted to tell you, this is me just being super open and honest, and maybe an overshare, but there was something in me that wanted to tell you that it was with the British Paralympic swim team before the Rio Paralympic Games, because why is that more impressive than helping like someone that just can't swim? Like we can often put these different things on different levels. Whereas I think the thing that I was battling with was like I'm just me. Like I don't have to have another label. Then like having a conversation almost with myself, like, but why are you now going and trying to get another label? I think it's one of these things, isn't it? Labels where it's like, it can be helpful for people to like have some context to go like, okay, I get that's the thing that you're doing or whatever. I think what I've come to learn is like someone can label me or give me a label to help for them formulate where I sit in wherever. Whereas I don't have to take that on. I can just be the person that I am. And I think that's been a healthy realizational process to go through.
Yeah, I do wonder if sometimes the need for a label is more about what we need to give to others rather than what we need to give to ourselves.
100%. And what they need to understand who you are or whatever.
Yeah, because I guess, my assumption is as a complete, we don't know each other, Jacko, until this conversation, I can feel that thought of it's a huge career to lose or give up rugby. So therefore, the natural question that emerges from that is, so what are you doing now then?
Yeah.
What are you doing now then? Because that's so big.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wonder if that's part of it then, that kind of
I think also
unconscious pressure.
Yeah, I think also, sorry, it's you're making me think. This is what I like when podcasts do this because it ends up being like a therapy session. But you're making me think that the label is helping us keep the conversation superficial. Because if you go, oh, who are you? And I go, oh, I play rugby. And you're like, okay, without, you don't say it out loud. You don't go, oh, I know what rugby means. But you're like able to go, okay, I know what rugby is. I've got an idea of the type of personality or person you are because you're in that sort of thing. And we then make some assumptions, but it can be very surface level. Whereas if you said to me like, hey, who are you? And I went, well, I'm this guy that's actually really suffering with this deep-rooted fear of X. You're going to go like, what the hell are you talking about? And we're much happier having these like sort of surface level conversations, which, I guess, I don't know how I feel about it. I quite like to go a little deeper.
And I find myself looping back to Patrick's question, Jacko, about how you got into breathwork, because it then prompted me to think about, we're talking about slowness and slowing down here, aren't we? And reducing that superficial conversation. I wonder if part of the breathwork learning has been learning how to slow down and be more present as well.
100%. 100%. And I think what I've always found looking back on my life is that if you don't slow down, like the body will make that happen anyway. So like I'd always get an injury when I needed to rest. And yeah, definitely, because you literally need to slow down your breathing. The breathing is almost one of the simplest and starting points of calming that stress response down.
You've written a book called Breathe Smarter, Run Stronger. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, really, and what brought you to the point of writing the book.
The book came out 2 months ago, but I think that process started over 2 years ago, maybe. I remember signing the contract on my birthday, literally on my birthday. And yeah, there were certain things that, like the role of carbon dioxide in vasodilation and oxygen supply to the brain, that were so important for me to reestablish for like my nervous system, as well as actually just like breathing biochemistry, as well as the mechanical ventilation. Just sort of like totally blew my mind at first of how much this whole thing had been overlooked. And then when you started digging into what that looked like from how is the way we're breathing affecting our actual athletic performance, and you start to dig into that, you start to uncovering lots of stuff that then it's like, well, why haven't we covered this before, or thought about this before? Why when I do my strength and conditioning like qualifications, like we don't cover anything to do with breathing. It just seems a bit wild. And so I started just doing, trying to upskill myself and doing a lot of educational courses and learning from lots of experts. I got to the point where I'd been working with a lot of elite and international sorts of athletes and teams, and doing some consultancy with some international teams in various different sports, where there wasn't a lot of people out there. I was looking, I guess, wasn't a lot of people out there with any level of expertise into it. And the publisher said something that I'll probably never forget. It was like, with a book, you either need to be the first or the best, but ideally both. So we tried to do both those two things. But they approached me, and I'd already started writing. I'd written about 40,000 words, because what I found was that when I wrote out what I was trying to write down in a logical way that someone else could read and then be able to follow if they were going to coach an athlete, because that helped me in my mind solidify out a sensible, rational, progressive sort of framework for how do you train the various different parts of our respiratory and ventilation systems. Like, what do we do and where does this, because it was all quite a jigsaw of like, okay, we've got these different things, and I was experimenting with different bits and like trying to put them all together like into a way that actually made sense. So I actually found writing initially was helping my own coaching process. The editor who I spoke to, he didn't know that I'd been writing. I was like, oh, if you see, I'd shared on social media, oh, I'm writing a book. And he was like, no, I just, nothing to do with that. But I was like, oh, well, I've written 40,000 words already. He was like, oh, send it over to me and I'll have a look. And I was like, oh gosh, I don't want to send you what I've written. Like I was just dead scared. Like I was told at school, I would fail English. So my mum and dad heard that from the teacher. And they took me to have extra English lessons on a Saturday morning. And you can imagine how much I loved doing that. But again, it's a bit like the brain injury. It's like I hated doing that. I didn't want to do it. But actually, decades later, it serves me because I didn't fail English.
You don't mind me saying, when I introduce breathwork as part of a therapeutic conversation, most people think it's woo-woo, Jacko.
Yeah, for sure.
That's how they describe it. I'm wondering, to not put you on the spot too much, like what are the sort of top 3 main messages you want to get about the benefits of breath work, either for athletes or people in everyday life?
I think it can influence so many different things, because your breathing is a reflection of your autonomic nervous system. Stuff like HRV that we now people get a little bit more excited about measuring. Well, we're looking at the variance in heartbeats that's being created by your breathing. So the idea that, and I was the same in terms of saying like, the idea about when I first came across breathing, it was like, really, is that really going to do anything? Like breathing's just automatic, right? Like and when I said about Patrick McKeown's work and being from a very scientific approach, it was like, it very much spoke to this of like, this is not woo-woo. This is what's happening when you breathe. This is what's happening with your blood gases. This is how your breathing is affecting your blood pH. Like this is how breathing is influencing your nervous system. These are the mechanisms. The very fact that your heart sits in the middle of your lungs. Like when the lungs fill with air, does that increase pressure on the heart? Is that going to change your heart rate? And when air leaves, it's like they're literally directly impacting each other, even mechanically, let alone everything else that's going on. So because it's working at such like a fundamental level, it's almost like take your pick, it's going to have an influence on it. if it can influence the autonomic nervous system, and I think that's from a brain injury perspective, you go, that's where I guess I've got a lot of buy-in from medics working in the sports performance world, where they like go, okay, we've got this athlete, their symptoms are all like autonomic nervous system like related in terms of dysregulation. We're tracking it back to that. It's like, well, yeah, here's how breathing is going to influence that nervous system. So yeah, it can almost be anything. And from a brain injury recovery perspective, I think that there's 3 key things that we need to do. We need to rebalance CO2 sensitivity, those chemoreceptors in the brainstem. So we need to rebalance CO2 within the blood. We need to improve diaphragmatic breathing mechanics. And then we need to down-regulate the sympathetic tone or drive that will have been created, so increase vagal tone. And, some simple breathing practices can do all those things.
So to somebody who is not scientifically trained in any way, what does that then mean? What do those results translate into physically?
Essentially, like if I'm more sensitive to CO2 as a result of my respiratory centers being disrupted, I've become more like upper chest dominant with my breathing, and I'm breathing at a faster rate. I'm stuck in a state of stress. And it's going to be very difficult for you to get out of that state until you address your breathing, because your breathing's happening automatically. So it's just keeping you in that state. It's not that you have to put an intervention in because it's automatic. And I think one of the classic things is that I often say is that just because it's automatic doesn't mean that it's optimal. That's unfortunately one of the reasons breathing. It's amazing that breathing's automatic, but that makes us overlook it. And it isn't just automatic. You can take conscious control of it. And sort of circling back around to some stuff we've already said around, when you can't do anything else post brain injury, it's like there is, you could start by just practicing breathing quietly in and out through your nose whilst you're lying down, about to have a nap. And breathing quietly is just going to slow it down. Breathing through your nose is going to reduce the volume, so you're not over breathing. A little bit more connection if you get your tongue in the roof of the mouth, better connection to your diaphragm. There's some really nice things that you can do to send some, let's say, safety signals to the brain rather than that stress response. And the research and literature on like levels of CO2 in your blood affecting blood flow, oxygen supply to the brain is like, it's there in black and white. So you can change the blood flow and oxygen supply to your brain through increasing CO2 in the blood through your breathing.
And by reading your book, I imagine readers would get a better of an understanding of this.
All their money back. No, the book is, angled more towards athletic performance, and there's some specifics for running. There's obviously my story in the intro and my brain injuries covered and all that type of thing. But, interestingly, whether someone is nervous before their first ever marathon and needs to regulate their breathing and their stress response because of that scenario, or whether they're going to do a very gentle exercise, then, well, it's not too dissimilar to a gentle exercise that someone that's stressed in an office or someone that's actually recovering from a brain injury needs. The context can change, but breathing doesn't have to be complicated. There's some detail that we need to understand in order that we're doing the right things, rather than, the classic would be like, oh, just take deep breaths. And people often just take big breaths and not necessarily use their diaphragm, not ventilate air efficiently in terms of depth, and actually just take a larger volume of air, a bigger tidal volume than they need, and actually then lower CO2 in the lungs and blood. Even the classic one is that we, with the right intention, do breathing wrongly for the outcome that you're trying to achieve.
My experience has been, not a criticism, but mindfulness as a word has been hijacked by popular culture. So everyone rolls their eyes a little bit when they hear it. But for me, there's no, as you're talking about breathing, I can't help but notice how much I'm breathing, and I'm sure all of our listeners are doing exactly the same. And for me, I think when you just a simple presence of your breath is being mindful, it is doing mindfulness. It doesn't have to be, the cliche lighting incense and crossing your legs and doing the Buddhist thing. It's just being present and connected
But can I say the other thing that has come up recently? I did I did like a sort of resilience and stress workshop for a corporate client to their staff. One of the ladies sort of came up to me afterwards and was like, I really liked that the exercise, simple exercise you did with us at the end, because I've been trying to do box breathing, and like I found that exercise much better. I found box breathing a bit like stressful, where everyone says blah blah box breathing, and I said that's interesting because box breathing became popular because Navy SEALs were using it. Yeah, so Navy SEALs using it to stay calm in like an extreme environment. I said to her, "Are you a Navy SEAL?" She was like, "No." I was like, "So why are you doing Navy SEAL exercise?" And it was like, "Oh," and it's actually like, I was thinking back. I was like, "You've actually made a fair point there, Jacko. Like, she isn't a Navy SEAL, so why do we think that an exercise for a Navy SEAL is going to be the right exercise for me?" And just on that, whilst I'm on my soapbox, the exercises like box breathing or 478 or whatever things people have classically heard about, we've simplified it down to just following numbers, and all numbers do is change the speed of your breathing. And the speed of your breathing is only one dimension of your breathing. The speed of your breathing is not how much air you are ventilating, which is the critical thing that's going to affect the CO2 levels in the lungs and blood. And it's not got anything to do with the mechanics of your ventilation. Like, speed is just one parameter, a really important parameter, but not the only one. So if you've ever tried a breathing exercise and found that like it's not actually felt that good or helpful for you, and you've been following the correct cadence, or you've been following the correct speed, it's been like breathe 4 in, 7, then out, and you're like, that's not helpful. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means that the person that's gave you that exercise has gave you like one part of it, but not understood the whole thing.
It's a fascinating subject, Jacko, and I've got to say it's something that I've never thought about properly until our conversation today. A lot of our listeners work within the professional rehabilitation fields. I'd be really keen to hear from them about how much they consider breathing within rehabilitation, particularly in brain injury rehabilitation, and if it even forms a part of their thinking, and if not, if it's going to now as a result of having listened to you speak.
Doing a lot of marathons then, Jacko. Yeah. That's the plan. Yeah.
Tell us about the marathons.
So 2 marathons a day for 2 brain injury charities for 100 days. I think I said at the start, like there's a lot of charities. There's a lot of charities across the world, isn't there? And there's a lot of mental people doing insane things. So you can't just, if you want to raise awareness for charities that have very little awareness, like you got to do something a little bit outside of the box. And 1 marathon a day doesn't cut it these days. I'm trying to raise £1 million. And I've ran loads of marathons. There's 2 brain injury charities that I'm supporting, so you've got to give them 1 marathon each, haven't we? Is sort of, but it definitely it raises a few eyebrows. The daunting thing is, as we record this now, my starts the day after Kylie Minogue's birthday, which is the same day as my birthday. Start on the 29th of May, and we're running at 25 different locations around the UK. So spending 4 days at each one, and it's being designed in a way that we're running between 5 and 10k at a time. So little loops or out and backs back to the same point. I want to make it very easy for people to come and join. So you don't have to be part of, most endurance challenges. I mean, I don't know of any other endurance challenges. All endurance challenges are about one person doing this thing and people try and support along the way, but it's about that one person. This isn't about me. I'll be the one person that's doing all of them, but the invitation is for people to come and be part of it, and not just donate, please do, but don't just cheer from the sidelines. Like, be in it, be in this endurance challenge. And if that's a 5k, that's a 5k. Maybe once you've done 5k, you might go, oh, you know what, I might fancy another. You might do 10k. You might end up running further one day than you've ever thought you possibly could. Then you're going through then the same process that I'm going through, because this is something that I've obviously never done before, and it will be a world record if we get past day 80. If we get to day 81, it will be a world record.
Wow, I'm really struggling to get my head around the magnitude of this challenge.
It's further than from London to China. if that helps.
Wow, goodness me.
It feels like the cliche question, but how do you prepare your body and mind for something like this, Jacko? Like, can you?
Yeah, I've been, the last 2 years, I've been training for this. Put it into context, like 2021, I did my first ever marathon in like 4 hours 50 or something. But I was an absolute mess after that. Like, stiff as a board, crying my eyes out. I was in a hell of a state. And I thought I'd trained well for it, if you know what I mean. At the same event, the guy I was running with towards the end, he was doing the 50K. So he had another nearly 10K to do. When I crossed the finish line, he had to go and do another 10K. And I was like, no way could I do that. And then the next day, when I couldn't really walk, I was thinking about all the people that do ultra marathons and like multiple day things. And I was like, how on earth do you run, say, another marathon the next day? I was like, this is just, I can't walk. But I guess the way my mind works is like, if another human can do it, I'm like, well, I'm a human as well. Like, I can do it. I just need to like work out how to build up towards that. And I just sort of wanted to taste it. So I signed up for a 3-day event after that, but gave myself a year to train for that. And that nearly broke me as well. And then, I've just been building up, trying to normalize running twice a day. And yeah, the thing about this is if it's possible, it's gonna push me to put every single almost cell in my body into this. Like, I can't be ill-disciplined about anything. Can't be lackadaisical about my recovery or my sleep or my nutrition or like everything for 100. And that's quite a daunting task, but it feels quite right to me. Of like, it's difficult to really like. The book was an example of this. For like, when I had to the hand-in date, it was like for the next month, it was like shut everything else out. You're just doing this book, and I was in front of a computer writing this book for like probably 12 hours a day, and I was just like totally immersed in it, and I love that immersion. And so, if you want to find out how much you can actually do, you've got to try and take on a challenge that requires absolutely everything of it. If you try and do a challenge that only requires 50% of your effort, you're not going to put 100% in, because your body will only put in what it needs. This is really going to require every ounce of me and my relationship with my wife, who is going to be driving our camper van. So it's a team effort.
So you mentioned that you're doing the challenge for 2 charities. Which charities are there?
So Headway UK and Head for Change.
Amazing. And where can people find out more about the challenge that you're doing?
Yeah, so on my website, thebreathrunningcoach.com, you'll see there's a page there called Mission Impossible, which is what the challenge has been dubbed as. So it's all details there of like all the different locations we're at, all the dates we're at them. There's a live Jacko tracker once we get started. There's an interactive map that you'll see my head like bobbing around as we're running. And all the routes are on Strava, links there. There's a WhatsApp community created for, there's a different group for each of the locations that we're at around the whole of the UK. So you can just get updates and information about the route that or the location you're going to join at. And obviously the link to the Give Star fundraising page is on there as well.
Amazing. We'll leave the links for your website and other information in the show notes. Best of luck with it, and thanks so much for giving us your time today.
Yeah, and just before we go, Jacko, we asked everyone the same question, which is, what does rehabilitation recovery mean to you?
I'm going to say it's about listening to yourself, like slowing down enough that you can actually listen to yourself intuitively. What do you need? And I think that when that's too difficult, it's, finding loved ones around you to lean into them. I think that's one of the things that the endurance challenges have taught me, that someone can only show you how much they love and support you when you need all of their love and support.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Jacko. Absolute pleasure to speak to you. Good luck with your challenge.
Thank you, guys.
How unbelievable is that challenge, Patrick? After listening to that back and thinking about it, like truly, I almost can't get my head around that challenge.
But, if anyone can do it, Jacko can. I think if taken anything away from that conversation, it's that Jacko is one determined guy. So I think he's going to smash it, and I can't wait to hear how he gets on. And I really hope he manages to raise the funds that he's setting out to, £1 million.
Yeah. And I hope he absolutely goes beyond that too. And there was a couple of takeaways in that episode for me, but I think the main one was just that, again, that importance of slowing down. There's a wider message for all of us in that. Probably, I'm on the back of thinking a lot about AI as well. And AI has this potential for us, to be more efficient. And I think sometimes efficiency isn't what we need. We just need to slow down and just be a bit more present. And again, interestingly, every time I think about our conversation, I return back to thinking about my own breathing, and I might end up doing a bit more reading about that, or try and be a bit more present with that stuff.
It's really made me think, about how we are approaching our clients' rehabilitation, and whether, as teams, we're thinking whether breathing and how they breathe is even a factor when it comes to somebody's physical rehabilitation, but also their cognitive and psychological rehab as well. I know you mentioned, as we were speaking with Jacko there, about the breathing exercises that you might introduce with clients, but aside from that, is breathing and how it interacts with the brain and the actual physiology associated with it, is it even factored into our thinking? It's a fascinating subject.
Yeah, definitely. And, again, all of the kind of links to Jacko's information and his book and other ways of finding things out are in the show notes. And I just really enjoyed that conversation, Patrick, and loads more to come, right?
Loads more to come. So thanks for joining us for this episode. Keep your ears peeled, if that's even a thing, for our next episodes, which will be out very soon. But for now, thanks for joining us. See you next time.